This title slide, first off, let me start out by saying this. It's kind of interesting to bring someone like me into a research conference. The only thing I've been researching recently is how to grow my hair back. I was thinking about that, but I was also thinking about something else, but I'll get to that in a second. I had a problem because the name of my talk was Master of Your Own Domain, right? But I kind of had to ditch it. Because how many of you know, hold on one second, how many of you know Seinfeld? Right? I didn't realize that, I'm not a Seinfeld fan, I didn't realize that Master of Your Own Domain in Seinfeld meant some sort of autoeroticism. Very bizarre. So I had to scratch that title. And I had been using this one for a while. Virginia Woolf, Domain of One's Own. And people were like, well, you're kind of diminishing Virginia Woolf's kind of, unbelievable vision about, empowerment for women. And also, it's a little too erudite. So I tried to find, what am I going to do here? So I said, hey, He-Man. I'll relate to the people, master of the universe, right? But there's a problem here. It's masculist. He's muscular, kind of white. So I was like, so I said, no way. She-Ra, right? That gets at everybody. But does it, right? She's white too, not kind of really dealing with the idea of the other. So I said, this is definitely going to do it, right? Orko. Everybody can relate to Orko, right? But that's a little bit anthropomorphic. At least that's what my cats told me. So I was thinking, maybe the person who's going to represent Domain of One's Own or Master of Your Own Domain would be Battle Cat. But that said, I'm totally up for suggestions because I don't know what to name my presentation. That just gives you a bit of an idea of what you're in for. Who am I? I'm Jim Groom. I work at the University of Mary Washington. I'm an instructional technologist, and I work along some really awesome creative people. In that picture, you'll see Tim Owens, Martha Burtis, Andy Rush, and at the bottom, that's Ryan Brazel emerging because he's only been with us for 3 months. We're a group that I think has had a lot of fun doing instructional technology for about as long as I've known George, about a decade. And we started on this concept of DIY experimentation, right? 2004, when I came to Mary Washington, actually 2005, but this experiment had been going on for longer, what Gardner Campbell, who was our director at the time, basically said was, you guys get your own domain, you get your own web hosting, and you start experimenting with open source technologies. You start figuring what the best-of-breed tools are, what can you do to reimagine learning environments with open source tools. Now, we still had Blackboard, we still had to kind of manage that, but the idea was treat educational technologists as thinkers, as experimenters, right? And we did. We got, for the low price of, it was $6.95 at the time, it's even cheaper 10 years later, $4.95 a month, we got Bluehost accounts. We got domains, and we started experimenting. And we started experimenting with all sorts of open source applications. WordPress at the time was nascent, Drupal, Joomla, etc. And we started kind of saying, what would different environments other than the learning management system look like? And so we did this for several years. And what we started to do, we were kind of like, rocking out in our garage, right? We were like garage band. We had to do the LMS. That's kind of what you had to do, but it's not all we had to do. There were 6 of us. So we could actually experiment. And we did. And what happened out of that experimentation over a year or two is that we started coming up with platforms. So in 2006, we came, and this is kind of like, you could think of platforms kind of like venues, right? You do all this experimentation, you rock out in your garage, but then you want to see what it looks like, how people respond to it. So we started building platforms. This is a platform we built in 2006 called ELS Blogs. And what it basically did is it brought an entire department at University of Mary Washington, which is where I work, on the web. People got their own spaces. People started sharing the coursework they were doing. This was happening out in the open back in 2006, right? This was open courses. And it was happening, and it was fairly successful. So successful that a year later, we put the entire university on this platform. Anyone who wanted to teach a course using WordPress out in the open could. And what we tried to do is make it as seamless as possible. And it really created created some amazing results. But the platform wasn't the thing entirely. It was part of the thing, right? Technology informs everything we do. It's not like it's just about the teaching. Technology is crucial. But how it inflected the teaching is really the story for me and what's powerful about what we're doing. We had faculty from all disciplines starting experimenting with this space. This is Steve Gallick. He's a biology professor, and he teaches a histology course, which is basically the study of cells. And he started to realize that in his lab, students would bring in digital cameras, they'd take pictures through the microscopes, and they would actually bring them up to Facebook to study. And so what he did is he said, why don't we do this on UMW blogs, but actually make the students tell the story of the cell. So it was called cell storytelling. And they did this. 19 students put up about 6,000 images of different cells. And it's become a resource for people all around the world who are interested in particular cells. Right? But it doesn't stop there. Jeff McClurkin has his students build probably one of the most important sites on UMW, period. It's a site dedicated to the archives of one of the great civil rights leaders who's actually from Texas, James Farmer. And he's one of the people who really started the sit-ins, who really started the idea of a civil rights movement. And he taught at University of Mary Washington for about 10 years. And we have an archive of his stuff that was just sitting in a room. So these students brought it and put it online as part of a system we already have. The other thing this system started to do is it started to create databases for our students who are surveying the burg. What does that mean? You know, I'm from Fredericksburg, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with Fredericksburg to some degree. Yeah, Fredericksburg, the Civil War is a current event, right? It's still happening. Like, people are like, hey, look at that, you know, there goes Lee. It's bizarre. I'm from Brooklyn, where the history doesn't matter at all. It's just like, can you get a good piece of pizza or what? There, it's like the history is everywhere. So much so that it's one of the best preserved towns in America of that era. And what is happening here on this site is students and faculty are actually taking a survey of the different houses and locations. And this is open for any student to do, and they're building it on top of a resource as classes go on. This is what UMW blogs kind of started to be. And it's been this amazing resource. This platform that just started in the garage has gotten, over the last month, for example, 200,000 unique visitors. We are a school of 4,000 students, small public liberal arts. Just over the last month, 426,000 page views. Over the course of a year, we'll get 5 million page views. 2 million visitors to see the work our faculty and students have done. This is an open platform that we built so that our faculty and students can have a voice on the web. This is crucial. Now, I was doing a little research, so I do some analytics. I'm not totally an idiot. Well, that's arguable. But anyway, I was looking at Google Analytics the other day, and I realized we had our biggest single day ever. 14,000 visits in one day. And I was like, what is going on? So I did a little research on Google Analytics, and I realized that this link here, 8,000 views, was a student's post about how The Matrix, the movie, relates to the allegory of the cave by Plato. And what happened? Well, we did a little research, and we realized it got Reddited. 712 people voted it up because people found it, they liked it, and they shared it. And they created a community around it. 150 people commented on it because they were fascinated by it. So we traced it back, and here's the student's post. That was for a class. That actually was part of the web, the work they did. And I think empowered them as a result. Well, one of the things about that data, because I started kind of really mining, because I started to feel my research chops. And I looked at the last one, and you'll see it says Sexuality, Post-Kinsey, Masters and Johnson. 4,170 hits. It's like, wow, that's what's going on there. So I followed up the site. I realized there was a site from 2011 about psychology, the psychological history of women, that was talking about the Masters and Johnson experiments. I was like, well, why is it getting so many hits? Can anyone here guess why it's getting so many hits right now? Yes. Masters of Sex, exactly. There's a TV show based on these two researchers who were basically sexologists who started researching into the idea of sexual dysfunction and sexual arousal. And there's this new Showtime TV Masters of Sex, that this student, if you search Masters and Johnson, is the 9th hit on the first page of Google. Cha-ching! Right? Our students are informing the world about stuff they want to learn. And I think that's really powerful with a platform like this. For example, we have that, but look what else people are viewing on UMW blogs. This isn't light stuff. Understanding W.E.B. Du Bois' concept of double consciousness. That's a powerful idea that people want to understand, and our students are helping them. That's not something to bat an eye about. To me, that's open at its best. We're creating a community around learning and teaching and thinking and putting it out there on the web so that we can augment the experience for everybody. And then, as we move through platforms, we came to this, DS-106. And let me just say, this course could be your life. And that's a reference to the Minutemen. That was for you, Grant Potter, out there somewhere on the Ethernet. Now, this was inspired by what I like to consider the old gold MOOCs. This is a rare shot of Stephen Downes. You'll see it has the syndicate on top on the hat, right? And it says there, I know you probably can't read the script, but that's CCK08, the OG MOOC. Now, we were inspired when we started this course, which is a digital storytelling course, by a couple of things that Downes, Siemens, and Cormier did with this MOOC back in the fall of 2008. They did something that I thought was amazing. They had this theory called connectivism. And connectivism was the idea that we network our learning, and learning is augmented as a result of that networking. So they built a course not to explain what connective is, but to demonstrate it in practice. So the actual research and the theory became the practice of taking it. And more than that, which I think was what was novel about it, they invited people, and they came. 2,200 people signed up for this course, which in 2008, before we heard numbers of like 190,000 AI, was remarkable. And I remember at that point being skeptical, like, how could you deal with 2,200 people? That's amazing. And now we throw out 100 or 30,000 like it's candy, right? Oh, 30,000, that's a small MOOC. 2,200, I was like whacked. I was morally like, how can we do this? What's happening? But they did this. They actually reached out to people. Here's the OL Daily, September 15th, 2008, where you would actually tell people what's going on. And this is George's eLearn Space in about October of 2008, where he's trying to keep people updated. And there was this constant invitation into the discussion. It wasn't about you took the course, you're in it or you're not. At any point along the way, you could become part of this discussion. And I thought it was really remarkable, right? And on the same page, we had been kind of building at the University of Mary Washington an ethos that I thought was really important to the work we've done. The ethos was, at the heart of it, we need to empower faculty and students to control their own spaces, to build their own infrastructure, to become their own sysadmins. This is what Gardner Campbell, in this essay in the Educo's Review in 2009, called a personal cyber infrastructure. So the work we were doing with UMW blogs I thought was amazing, but for me it was only an interstitial step to empower each and every student and faculty member at the University of Mary Washington to be able to build that same thing for themselves. And that's how we started in 2004, 2005 with that Bluehost. Couldn't we do that for an entire community? So DS-106 became, at least for me, about what that architecture would look like. How could we build and design an open architecture? And this is the course, DS-106. This January it turns 4. I can't believe it. It's the same age as my youngest son. So, like, when I think about him, I think about, you're like DS-106. Come here, give me a kiss. So DS-106 is actually a course I was teaching starting in the spring of 2010. And the idea was pretty simple. I wanted students to get their own domain, their own web hosting, and kind of define and narrate their life on the web as part of this course. The idea was the storytelling was them. Every Facebook status you make, update you make, is a story. Every video you put up is a story. Every tweet you do is a story. Every blog post, this idea of transmedia storytelling as this fragmented vision of who we are as individuals coming together as a sense of the whole. And so we started doing this, and we built this class, and the idea was for them to interrogate the web. This real sense of literacy by understanding how the web works, how to create a domain, how to populate a WordPress, how to build your own media wiki, how to integrate all your other social media services into that space so you can archive it and control it. A real sense of who you are on the web, not just as a sharecropper or a consumer, but as a participant and a producer. It was what was driving the logic of this class. And what was at the heart of it was this notion of syndication and aggregation. Right? We have 25 students in the class, which is not massive, right? And we have 25 students who all have their own website. So how do we aggregate it and syndicate it into one space? This is another thing that Downs and Siemens and Cormier did very well. They used Grasshopper, which is actually a syndication engine, to bring all the different people, all those 2,200 people, into a conversation and aggregation. So we did the same thing. We used a different tool called Feed WordPress for part of WordPress, and we started to bring all these students into one space. Right? And we had tags so we could see what they were talking about, what assignments they were doing. Right? We had their own individual spaces, but we could bring them together in aggregate. Now, this is something that I'm interested in because for a lot of people, this represents a problem. It represents a problem of coherence. Recently, I think at a Sloan conference, I saw this retweet by Kevin Kelly. So thank you, Kevin Kelly. And I don't know if this is what Daphne Collar said, but the idea was here. She says the hub and spoke model, which is what I'm talking about with this aggregation with DS-106, doesn't scale, right? In other words, the web doesn't scale. And I have a deep problem with that. I do think that there are problems of coherence that as a community we have to solve with this model, but I do think it scales brilliantly. I think it scales the only way the web can. It scales to the role of the individual user on the web and empowers them. The problem I have with most of the corporate MOOCs right now is that they're LMSs on steroids. They're just big LMSs that can handle a lot of people. But they don't for a second consider community, consider the individual, and consider how the individual scales on the web. That's their last thought. And that, to me, is the most damning, indictment of them. Now, how does DS-106 deal with this sense of community? Well, from 2010 to 2011, it was a very small class, 25 people, but people were interested in it. They wanted to learn how to put up their domain. They wanted to learn how to install WordPress. They wanted to become sysadmins of their own education. So in 2011, we decided to kind of take a page out of George and Dave and Stephen Downs' book and invite people. I sat down with Alan Levine, Martha Burtis, and Tom Woodward, who are really architects alongside me with this whole thing. And we said we're going to invite people. And what we're going to do, and this was very hard for me, is we were going to kind of dismiss the idea that I had those 10 assignments. Right? How many of you have seen History of the World Part 1? These are the 20. And then one tablet breaks. These are the 10 commandments, right? Like that arbitrary notion. Well, I had that in DS-106 for the first year I taught it. These are the 10 sacred assignments. Do them and be liberated in the digital media storytelling space. And people were like, ah. And Tom Woodward was like, I know you think your assignments are really great, but they're not. And so I cried. I went home. I had my emo moment. I listened to Morrissey. I didn't eat meat for a week. It was terrible. But then I actually came to the idea that what would it look like to have a course in aggregate distributed where we had assignments and we had an assignment bank, which is what you're looking here, that not only I could populate with my 10 assignments, but anyone in the class or anyone on the web could populate. What would it look like? So in December 2010, getting ready for 2011, we opened it up. And hundreds of assignments came in. One of them was the animated GIF that I'll talk about in a while. And an entire community of 400 to 500 people signed up for this course, which by most standards is not massive. But what became massive is the notion of community. And it was really powerful. Here's an example. A student actually, and when students submit assignments and they go viral, it's a powerful thing because stuff in DS-106 goes viral in the community. This student here, Daniel Zimmerman, who's been taking the class for 3 times or 4 times, he's great. He's taken it again and again and again. He just seems to drop off for the last 3 weeks so he could take it again. So there's that retention thing with MOOCs we should talk about. But he's retaining it 3 times, right? 4 times. I take that as a badge of honor. But this is the DS-106 propaganda posters. And you'll notice, you go in there, you see, oh, it's 3 stars, which means the difficulty level. It also tells you about it. So if I click on that assignment, it actually gives me some details about it. Here's the propaganda poster. Here's the description of it. Do this assignment, you tag it on your blog. So you put 2 tags on it. So wherever you do it, if you're syndicating into DS-106, it will show up underneath the assignment. So everyone who's done that assignment, you'll see their assignments so you can look at them. The other thing is people are encouraged to write tutorials for assignments. So if you wrote a tutorial, you can see that there. And so what happens is this assignment page becomes a communal space. And in many ways, it's informed by an open website called Ravelry. Any knitters out there in the house? Big fan, right? You know Ravelry? Love Ravelry. It's a knitting site where people put up their projects. And communities identify and organize around projects. And we wanted that to happen with assignments. Now, what's amazing is Alan Levine right now is working on an open theme for WordPress that would let anyone do this. And it doesn't have to be about assignments. It could be about knitting. It could be about recipes. But it's this idea of there's more than one way to build a community than a forum. I don't know if we've realized that yet as a community, but there is. Now, some things that come out of that. Here's some of the projects. Build for yourself. Build for DS-106. And one of the things about DS-106 is it's really propaganda-orientated, which I love. There's propaganda videos, there's propaganda posters, and people get into that. We'll look at a propaganda video in a second. Look at this one. Comments build DS-106, right? That real kind of hardcore, muscle, Soviet, like build, build, build. But the message is right. Community is built by people interacting and boosting each other's work, encouraging, creating a sense of community. Right? I still think that's the case. And then there was this, right? Kiss! Anyone see Revenge of the Nerds? Nerds! But this is him screaming GIFs. GIFs were an amazing thing in December of 2010. The class was just being imagined, right? We were building it as we were flying. And Tom Woodward put in an assignment called GIFs. Before the class even started, which was January 10th, 2011, 200 people had done GIFs, and the class hadn't started. And communities started forming around the idea of how do you create a GIF? What's the best application? What makes a good GIF? How do you make GIFs from particular movies? What kind of GIF is a joke? How do you use GIFs as punctuation marks? Like the idea of the GIF as the vernacular of the web became something to really interrogate, which I think it should be. We shouldn't dismiss it. And I think it was DS-106 at its best because it was trying to inhabit, interrogate the very vernacular of the web that people are using to communicate in alternative ways, which at its best is what the web is. And then stuff started happening like this. I'm a 70s child. I was born in 71. So around 78, 79, maybe it was in 3rd grade, 4th grade, and I got these Valentine's Day cards. Right? I actually got them in Long Island. Someone gave me one. And I was blown away because a student went out to an archive and found them and started giving other students Valentine's Day cards. But then something happened. They started to get weird. Right? People were like, you look hotter online. And I'd come in and I was like, what do I do with this? I was like, how can people assume that, I was like Superman saying this to Wonder Woman, and the girl who made it was like, Wonder Woman saying it to Superman. And so my assumptions became a kind of notion of being discussed. But it was interesting how the community started to remix and rethink the work each other were doing. And I think this really, for me, was an idea, and this is like week 4 of the class in 2011. This is not only a lawn with DS-106 mowed into it, which I think is cool, but this is a lawn in Melbourne, Australia. Someone mowed it during their summer, I imagine. This is Peter Rowan, Peter. And he actually kind of was part of it. He would put up assignments. He'd also be part of the radio, which I'll talk about, but I was really remarkable. Here's another assignment. We have this thing called the 4-Icon Challenge. And it was tell a story or a movie in 4 icons. And I know that 19 is misspelled. I definitely know that. So if you're going to grammar me, do that, fine. I'm on you, like white on rice. This is actually an assignment. I don't know who did this. This is what we call a drive-by assignment. It happens all the time. People just drop it off and go on. What does it mean for people to just do an assignment for a course because they find it fun? This is also an assignment that second graders are doing in Richmond, Virginia on a regular basis. This is an assignment that finds its way up to a Catholic school in Canada. We find people from all over the world who are just taking from this assignment bank and using it as part of their face-to-face class within a context that's localized for them, which for me is fascinating. And then we tried to build in this idea of the daily habit, the daily create. How many of you ever remember this site called the Daily Shoot? Anyone remember it? It was an amazing site, and I think we have a lot to learn from the design of the open web, like Ravelry, but also like Daily Shoot. These two photographers built a site where they put a prompt every day, and they asked people to take pictures and then tag them on Flickr. And the prompt, you'll see here, people from all over the world would take the pictures and upload them. And you would go to this page and you would see tens, if not hundreds of images that you would click through to see how people interpreted the assignment. And I think by osmosis, we get a sense of what you think, what you liked as an aesthetic, what you didn't, how people were approaching it. You were learning, and you were learning within a community, and you could click through that image back to the person's Flickr page and give them comments. This was communal learning at its best. And funny enough, it scaled to the level of the web, right? Without dismissing or erasing the individual. And unfortunately, the Daily Shoot, we used that regularly in part of DS106, but they closed it down. The photographers were like, we're done. We've done this for long enough. We're moving on. So Alan Levine and Tim Owens built our own version for DS106. And so we have it as a daily assignment for anyone in that class to do. And it's photography, video, writing, art. It's a range of topics now. And there's actually, so if you see it, right, I'll look at that. If I click this one, I'll get a look at somebody's cat. And what's interesting is this Daily Creates assignment was something 12. And so someone had named their cat 12. And I told a story about why they named their cat 12. And so the idea of assignment brought the personal out. And it kind of brought the human, like I think George said quite appropriately, back into the relationship of the class. And for me, this is all part of open architecture. This is all design that anyone could do with open source tools that are out there already. And this, to me, blows my mind. 2012, two students wanted to actually build out part of the class. They wanted to build a site, part of the kind of suite of sites that became or was becoming DS106 as a community called Inspire. And what these students did is they built the forum where students could submit the work that other DS106 students did that inspired them over the years. And so what was happening is a community was growing. There were people who had taken the class whose work was being recognized, people who were in the class who were recognizing it, and people who were coming into the class who were seeing how this community works. And so the course, in some ways, transcended the idea of a specific 15-week experience and became a community. And I think, isn't that the goal? I would think. On top of that, Alan Levine created a remix machine where any particular assignment could be remixed. So you could take an assignment and the card would say, Dr. Seuss this, or do the reverse. And how you interpreted it is how you would do it. Now, one of the coolest things that happened to me, and as part of the class, is week 3 of 2011, we were actually doing the class, and people were like, you know what? We need an Illuminate. We need some sort of Blackboard thing so we can have synchronous sessions. And I was like, do we really? Do we really? I don't know if we do. Because there was 500 people and they wanted a sense of it. And so what I really felt like we needed was a radio station. We needed a place where we could actually perform and produce and share. And lo and behold, Grant Potter, who was up in British Columbia, northern British Columbia, that's him with his Graham Parsons shirt on, I love him. he actually created a radio station by week 3 that we were actually all uploading music to, sharing our favorite films, doing presentations, so much so that by week 6, a radio show was built into the course. Students had to do a radio show. They had to do bumpers. They had to do commercials. And they had to actually create a narrative that was a half hour long. And I was really blown away by how this class kind of did it. Now, this just didn't happen by magic. This stuff happened on Twitter using a DS106 tag. It happened by bringing a community together in a bunch of places. Twitter was huge. Another thing that's interesting is I had a senior computer science major who was in this class. And one of the things with DS106 radio was it was a server that was feeding out music and feeding out live broadcasts because people all over the world would go live. Rowan Peter, who actually mowed DS106 into his lawn, would actually go live from Melbourne. And you would hear the crickets in the background, or the cicada. And it was February here, so you couldn't because it was winter. But there it was summer. It was really a kind of cool personalizing effect, just to hear the crickets. And what's cool is a student of mine realized that he could create a Twitter bot that allowed us to put out every different song and live broadcast that came out. And he did this because he wanted to. It wasn't an assignment, right? And more than that, he wrote it up. He wrote up how he did it. Now, DS106 became this kind of fascinating model. And what we do as instructional technologists at UMW in particular is we try and push the idea of what we do to the limit. And I think this was never clearer for me when we did what is called now in infamy the Summer of Oblivion. A pedagogy of uncertainty. And that's with props to a professor of higher education in Scotland, Ray Land, who I saw him talk once, and I really love what he had to say. How many of you are familiar with David Cronenberg's Videodrome? Anyone? Videodrome's a fascinating movie to me, particularly because it has this concept of Dr. Oblivion, Dr. Brian Oblivion, who has never dealt with anyone face-to-face for like 27 years. He's only come through the television. He's only always been mediated. And Dr. Oblivion, interestingly enough, was based on another Canadian, Marshall McLuhan. Right? So I didn't realize this. David Cronenberg took classes with McLuhan, and he actually, when he did Videodrome, had McLuhan as his model. So the idea for me was, what would happen if you taught an online class as someone who's never dealt with anyone face-to-face for 27 years, but only through online, even though the web hasn't really been around for 27 years? So what we did is, we created a Dr. Oblivion. And this person, this alternative identity, who's actually me, I just shaved my head and created a mustache, came to the students in a 5-week summer class and taught the class as Dr. Oblivion. And it was a narrative. It was a story. And Dr. Oblivion would get on for 3 hours and do video lectures, and they were boring. But he was kind of charismatic in a kind of very dull way. And it was kind of interesting. But by day 3, I had a nervous breakdown. Literally. Because I had this kind of dual personality thing going. I thought I was Dr. Oblivion. I was calling my kids were calling me Dr. Oblivion. I came home. My wife was like, I'm not staying in the same bed as you. You're weird. And I was like, what's going on? Like, I really started to lose it. So I told the people who I work with, I'm done. Dr. Oblivion, done. I'm hanging up. And they're like, whoa, what about the class? I was like, I'll just come. I'll put a hat on. I'll say, look, that was an experiment. And they're like, no, just make Dr. Oblivion go missing. So we did. And Dr. Oblivion went missing, and we actually built posters. And these were up in L.A. They were up in the New York subway. And people were like, what's going on? Because we had people all over the country taking the class. So Dr. Oblivion went missing, and Jim Groom, the TA, took over the class. Right? And there he is. Oh, unfortunately, this might not play. But this is actually a video made by a student. Because Jim Groom took over the class, but he was a little bit power hungry. And he started banishing students from the class. And so they started revolting. And they created an alternative class called DS107. And they came together, and they were like, Jim Groom's a tyrant. We want to bring Dr. Oblivion back. And as you could see, the course started to write itself. It was actually an alternative reality course. And us, as instructional technologists, we became like pilot writers for an episode. We'd sit down and say, what happens with Dr. Oblivion today? Okay, let's check Twitter. What are the students saying? And we would write the narrative. It was the greatest time I ever had as an instructional technologist because I felt like we were pushing the bounds of identity. We were pushing the bounds of what the web represents. I'm not recommending anyone go out and try and teach a MOOC as Dr. Oblivion. But I am suggesting this. We have only just begun to imagine the possibilities of this nascent technology. This is emerging now, and the idea of an online course where we can interrogate who we are and problematize questions of identity in some deep and powerful ways should not be overlooked. It really shouldn't. Now, I'm going to see, well, I'm not going to. And then there's a storify of the rebellion. And then what happened is other people got infected with Dr. Oblivion's bug. That was problematic. This is Andy Rush. And then Dr. Oblivion, Summer of Oblivion, jumped the shark. Our green screen stopped working, so we used a whiteboard, and we started killing off students, which I don't recommend either in a face-to-face or an online course. You shouldn't start. We brought them to the Camp Oblivion, and it kind of took on this Friday the 13th theme, and students started disappearing. And they were playing along with it. And it was really just an amazing experience to think about the online space as a space that really is, completely up for imagining. Now that brings me to BattleCat. What is this domain of one's own? As we were working with UMW blogs, we realized that students started going out and they started getting sites on their own. This site, for example, was called HireHassan.com. I mean, it's a very clear message, and they could map their domain onto their site. He created the site as a portfolio so that he could get a job. And he was very clear about it. He framed out all the stuff he did, his professional work, his personal work, he blogged. And then we had students who started doing this en masse. So here's a student, Caitlin Pringle Murphy. She built this site. She recently got an interview with PBS, and they gave her a job in part because not only her video worked, but she built and designed her own site. This site is hers. And what we started to realize that what was happening with UMW blogs and what was happening with this culture is we were building students, we were helping shape students who were digitally literate. This is our homepage just from yesterday. You'll notice Caitlin is the front page. Now, I have a problem with the digital native tag, but at the same time, University of Mary Washington has started to embrace what we're doing and what that experimentation has created. We are starting to find ourselves as the digital liberal arts. We're giving every student who comes, we did a pilot last year, every student their own domain and their own web hosting. We tried this out with 400 faculty and students over the 2012-2013 year, and it worked. People used it. So as of this year, we're actually starting to build that. Now, this is Tim Owens, and I have to give him a certain amount of credit right here because he came to us as a result of DS-106. He was taking it as an online open participant. He was working as a computer tech at Longwood University. And his work was so amazing, we were like, you should come work with us at Mary Washington. And he did. And all but single-handedly built the infrastructure for domain of one's own, which is basically like we brought web hosting in-house. And how do we do this? Not only do we give it to courses and make it curricularly based, but we focus on faculty. In the spring of 2013, so this past spring, we had 30 faculty sign up. We paid them $1,000, and we asked them to get a domain, get their own web hosting, read Martin Weller's book, The Digital Scholar, and start thinking about what it means to be a scholar online, what it means to control your own space and build it out. And they did. We've had some amazing examples, right? This is Andy Livy-Smith. She's the professor in historic preservation who built that Survey of the Berg site, right? So they started actually building these sites, both on UMW blogs, but more and more on this space. Other faculty used it as a portfolio space, where they aggregated all their work all over the web, which was perfect. So this semester, we opened it up to all freshmen, but actually to all students and all faculty. That's why that asterisk there. Anyone who wants a domain and web host can get it. And what we're seeing so far is remarkable. And there you'll see I'm a freshman, I'm not a freshman, I'm a faculty member. Now, remember when I talked about UMW blogs? This is a UMW blog, but there's something different happening with this site in that it's on UMW blogs, but it syndicates out to a student's personal site. So if you click on that visual notes blog, it will take you to Kaylee Wilshire's site. This is her portfolio. This is her space. She has her own domain, her own web hosting. She's the sysadmin of her own education, right? Sue Fernsebner, who's an amazing faculty member in history, she deals with Chinese history, and she actually is creating a site along with her students at a domain. So this is a course domain, taipingcivilwar.org. And her students are building a Google map. They're interviewing scholars who just recently wrote a book. They're building a timeline, and they're all blogging about the process. So what we're starting to do now is give our courses domains so they can use a wide range of tools. WordPress, Omeka, Drupal, you name it. They have the tools to build out these spaces. They're not limited to one option. And then we did something interesting with Domain of One's Own. We started creating directories by classes. We're using this tool, and I'll talk about it in a second, called Installatron, which not only lets us list all the class sites by class. So here's a class for multiple imaging, right? So this is a class for GIS. And we can see all the different students and the work they're doing, right? And if I go to this student's site, you'll realize it's still being created, but this is on his own domain, samsparks12.com, and you'll notice about, cover letter, portfolio, resume, right? Those are pre-populated. Those come out as soon as he installs his WordPress site or a particular package. And this is something we're working on right now. Every student and faculty who gets a UMW domain or a domain of one's own gets their own dashboard. They can go in and they become sysadmins, right? And what we're starting to do, and I think this is powerful, is we're starting to get to the point where we have this add-on, basically one-click installer called Installatron. Installatron allows people to select from over 100 open source tools, to install them, but also we make sure it's pre-populated with spam control if you're doing WordPress, right? Locking down the wiki if you're doing MediaWiki. Like, we actually customize it to our particular needs. On top of that, here's the hundreds of sites you can install, not limited to WordPress. But here's, for example, you're going to install a WordPress. You click on that. What we have here, and it might be a little bit hard to see, is people can not only create their own WordPress account, they can create a multi-site, which is basically what UMW Blogs is, right? So we've given them the tools. More than that, they can pick what kind of package type. They can have a portfolio. They can have an art portfolio, a professional portfolio. They can have a syndication engine. So you want to create a syndication bus that's basically the kind of grasshopper-like MOOC that's pulling in all the work from different students, one click. And we can associate it with different classes. And on top of that, we know because of Installatron, we get everybody's feed, which is brought into a major feed so we can see what's happening around the entire community. And we can see what applications people are installing. So at the base level, we have a wide view of this broad range of different sites. We're giving people their own tools and their own possibilities, but as a university, we're still trying to imagine what that community looks like we did with UMW Blogs. And I think, to me, this is the exciting development that's happening at UMW right now. I mean, and we actually did this, right? So this is how awesome we are. We not only did Domain of One's Own, but Tim Owens and I said, you know what? Why can't anyone do this? So we created Reclaim Hosting, that anyone can buy a domain with $12, and this in part is funded by Shuttleworth, who gave me a flash grant. And we built this in so any faculty member who wants his or her students to have their own space could do that. Have the students pay $12 for a domain, have their own kind of dashboard for controlling their work, and then get rid of it at the end of the semester, or take it with them. And the idea is we're moving beyond MOOCs to a degree that I don't think MOOCs are going away. But the idea of the individual at the center of it is crucial. And how we make that coherent and work together to allow people to take their work with them seamlessly is what we really have to figure out and really have to work well. And I saw this back and forth between Alec Kouros and Todd Conway on Twitter yesterday during this conference. I really like what Downs said here. Stephen Downs said this: your student's next learning management system won't be a learning management system, and it will belong to the student. not you. And I think there's something there. I don't care what kind of MOOC or what kind of course you're developing. Start thinking about what frame you can build so that the student could take the work they're doing out. It can be part of their portfolio. It can be part of their identity online. And it's not a black box. It doesn't cut the course experience off from the web. The two need to live together because they scale. John Udell recently talked about the MOOCs need to be more about a user innovation toolkit. And I couldn't agree with this more. What we think at the heart of what we're doing at Mary Washington is we're giving the option for every faculty member and every student to have an innovation toolkit that they can reimagine the platform on which they learn. And not all of them will, but I bet 15 to 20% will. And that is huge. That is a huge innovation for a group of students. And it's a huge innovation for an entire community, because our president is writing in the Huffington Post about this. We are doing this as a community. And we're branding it with our campus, not with Coursera. Right? Like, that's what's bizarre to me about these big universities. They have awesome brands, and they're like, yeah, a Coursera course. University of Michigan never comes up. Penn State? No, I'm doing it on Coursera. This is something happening at Mary Washington. This is something we invested in people for. This is the work we do. This is the innovation we've been a part of. And it's materializing as something real. And I'm proud of that. And I thank you all for sitting here and listening to me about it. Thanks. Mm-hmm.
So I guess if there's any questions, it's a small enough room, stand up, yell them up at Jim. And the reflections that I find with this kind of work that's fascinating is this notion that we can be creative at scale. So often the talk in education is that when we talk scale, we're talking about a system that we've reduced mechanically to a set structure, and now we just roll it out to everyone else. But creativity at scale, that's, I think, one of the unique innovations of the work that Jim's been doing. So are there any questions, any thoughts, reactions for Jim? Go ahead. You're going to have to yell, so I can do that. Don't worry. Just a really quick question.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Very simply, is the contribution there? Can they take the with them when they finish studying?
That's great.
Forever? Are you going to pay for them forever?
Here's how we're doing it. It's a brilliant question. So we actually give anyone who's interested, right? And so right now, of the 1,000 freshmen who came in, 500 took us up on it, which is a pretty good number. And what we're realizing is that we can give them 4 years of that domain, and we'll give them a 5th grace period. And the idea is that, they keep the web hosting with us. That's not a problem. But they have to decide whether they're going to take that $12 a year domain. And if you think about other portfolio systems like Chalk and Wire, like they charge an arm and a leg. Students aren't going to pay. We want to make this domain relevant so that they'll see a reason to have this address on the web moving forward. So that's how we've approached it. We do at some point say you have to take ownership of it, but that's the whole idea of domain of one's own, is we want faculty and students to have ownership of it. And I think also that they do. Like, I don't think it hasn't been an uphill climb, although we also have a long history, as I tried to make clear, of doing this with UMW blogs, of doing the innovation ourselves. And we have 6 people who, one of them works with the LMS. The other 5 work on this. And that's lopsided in that oftentimes it's 5 on the LMS, 1 on something like this. But we intentionally play down the LMS because we believe at the heart of what we do as a mission is innovative teaching and learning. And we do think that that can actually happen online. And so that's why we've done. Does that answer your question? Right now we haven't run into that problem, and we actually been pretty. The thing we're running into is people can open up their sites, do it, and then get spammed and not realize it. So we have space issues. So we've actually pre-populated cookies for comments and other kind of different mechanisms to help control some of that. So Installatron's been amazing because it's allowed us to package up stuff, but also to control and make sure that everyone's version is up to date. Make sure all the plugins and themes are up to date, because if there's any sysadmins in the house, they know that's a nightmare. So InstallTron takes care of all of that. So right now we haven't had bandwidth problems, but if we do, it will be getting another server, right? Just expanding, and that's a good problem to have, I think. You're welcome.
Got the mic on. Okay, we've got a question at the back here.
And then any suggestions on the domain of one's own naming? I mean, I'm serious about that.
So, Jim, my name's Larry Reagan. I'm from Penn State University, and I think you're a wacko, and I thank you for that. A lot of just great ideas here. I'm just wondering, what are, if we think about traditional online learning,
Sure.
Some of us have been doing this for a while, I'm not seeing a real difference between these ideas, which this is a good thing, and what we do in online learning. I mean, is there some distinction or something unique about the MOOC environment different? I could take a lot of these great ideas and go back and encourage our faculty to be thinking about some of this creativity.
I don't disagree with you, actually. I mean, I do think a lot of this is at the core of what faculty have been doing, good online learning. I think one of the things that I think this maybe encourages is maybe moving out of a predefined system that maybe by default limits your options, say in LMS, and understanding that part of the work and community you build there, if you build it online in an intelligent, distributed way, can follow you beyond that 15 weeks. I mean, one of the most amazing things about DS106 is that hashtag on Twitter. So I have students who 3 or 4 years later still contribute to the course. I have students who don't know anything about the course who are taking it because they have friends who are doing it. And so I just think it's a kind of subtle tilt to the open and to the open of the web. And so I don't think it's that different, and I think just that subtle tilt will make the awesome faculty who are already doing this stuff at Penn State University, and I know all too well how great the stuff you guys are doing, it just augments it that much more. And I think, you have the platforms there to do it. So I would just think, the environment within which you learn matters. And the same goes for online, and a lot of times I want to see, the whole idea of domain of one's own, particularly for faculty, is I want to see that they have the option. They may not do it, and students may not ultimately do this, but they have the option, and they have the option ultimately to delete it. But they also have the option to quickly and easily create a distributed MOOC platform that doesn't necessarily make them beholden to a corporation and doesn't lock in their data and isn't supporting what I think is a kind of a model that, in the end, is not really about that innovation. It's about scaling the LMS to the next level. And I'm not particularly interested in that because I wasn't particularly interested in the LMS to begin with. No, it's not that I don't like the LMS. I just feel better when it's not around. I've used that before, but I like it. It's from Barfly. I think, what's his name? Bukowski says, I don't dislike the police. I just feel better when they're not around. I always like that. Okay.
So my question is, when you got rid of the 10 assignments, the specified assignments, and opened it up, how did you deal with that in terms of marking and credentialing and those sorts of things?
That's a really good question. And so once I came out of my crying, I actually said, one of the things that Alan Levine and I kind of really sat down with, and Martha Burtis, as we were kind of imagining this, is part of the grading of the class is actually the narration of what you've done. So say you do an awesome animated GIF. That's not enough. You got to narrate how you did it, what your choices were. Oftentimes, 2 or 3 tutorials are required. So what we really wanted them to do as part of DS106 is reflect on their process. Because that's good blogging, is the process of reflection and thinking, and it's also good teaching, right? Asking your students to not only do something and struggle with it, but to reflect on how they did it. And so that was built into it. So we'd asked them to do X amount of stars of assignments, and for them to get a good grade on that, they had to actually reflect on how they did it, which also meant that their assignment didn't have to be a total success. It didn't have to be the best assignment. They could have a terrible assignment that they wrote up eloquently about what their challenges were and still get a very good grade. We have these objectives that have kind of been around for a while, and they're very broad. They're like interrogate the web, become a better web citizen. And I kept them broad intentionally because, as you're reimagining the class as it goes, like, hey, we're going to do a DS106 radio show that we hadn't planned, week 6, you have to be somewhat flexible. So I came at it with a real amount of flexibility, and I come from a very different approach. I'm not like a learning design person or instructional design. I'm kind of I come out of a tradition of teaching. And, I taught at CUNY grad center. I was a labor adjunct for years, giving my hard-earned labor away for no money. But I learned a lot. And what I learned is also you need freedom. You know, I think when you start getting this instructional design thing where you need to do these 4 objectives and stuff, I glaze over. I'm absolutely uninterested. I think it should be a pioneering effort between the students and faculty to make something new. And so that's how I approach it. Now, I think there should be that freedom. If someone feels more comfortable with the structure, that's fine, but that's not been our approach with the S106.
So,
okay.
So a quick comment to my colleague from Penn State. My name is Todd Marshall. I was at Syracuse, and I'm at Regent. We used a similar environment at the iSchool at Syracuse where we were trying to teach how to, for a librarian, how to put together and integrate all these tools to create a library website. So I was using this environment back in about 2008, and we had the students use all these open source tools with a cPanel environment because it's impossible to do that in an LMS. But what this did is to give the students a digital sandbox to play. And so we had students who didn't know any HTML, really. Within one semester, they integrated a digital repository for media, and then they used ePrints, they used Joomla, they used Koha, which was an open source library, and they built really a functioning, complete digital library in one semester. And that's very powerful. It was a capstone project. Then they could take that when they graduated and say, look, I've done the whole integration myself, and here's a working model, which was very powerful. And then it endured. And our goal was eventually, as I was a doctoral student, I pushed to say, when a student comes to our iSchool, they should get an email address, and they should get this. In our case was cPanel. Is that what you're using?
Yeah, that's exactly what we're using.
Yeah, so all the students, they got an email address and a cPanel environment. And it was also used for other courses like organizational behavior. They create a whole organization during the semester, and then at the end they have to do a digital instantiation of that, including an e-commerce site. And it's very doable. It's a great supplement. And that just happened to be for online courses. It didn't scale because the MOOCs weren't around in that sense
that's early
at that time. But so they gave it to the students for a whole semester after the end, and they had the issues of spamming and all those kind of things, so they would kill it. But I like that idea of giving them a domain, just having them buy it, because it's a lot cheaper than a textbook, and they get to use it for a long time.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. And one of the things that we're starting to learn is entire departments are now getting on. So we have like the history department, the computer science department, and the geography department who want this for every student. And so what's happening is they're building a curriculum around what that is, like the iSchool. And when that happens, it's really exciting because it's just the first semester. We're really trying to work out some of the kinks. But I think, you know, like you said, the implications for our students who go out into the world and say, yes, I know how domains work, I can build you a quick website in X amount of open source, what does that mean for their marketability? On top of the, hopefully, you know, engaging liberal arts experience. Like, it seems to be, it should just be part of the air they breathe as students right now. And I think when we put them into systems that basically, you know, isolate them or quarantine them from the web, we're not doing them a service at all. Dave.
That was a great talk, Jim. I really
I'm a big fan of yours, too. I like you. A lot.
I mean, I see the work that you guys are doing as fighting the passivity in education, right? Forcing those students into active positions, becoming creators, members of the knowledge economy, whatever you want to call it. What have you guys been doing with the people who fight back against that, the ones who struggle with becoming active? Because that's always the challenge for me as well.
It is. And building it into the curriculum, I have to say, does not hurt. If students know that this is a part of what they're doing, and this is why we start with faculty. 30 faculty, Susan Ferdsebner, an amazing example of a faculty member who not only understands this stuff integrally, she's got a Tumblr that 25,000 people follow, and she's basically like a news network for Chinese news. It's amazing to watch a faculty member do that. But she expects the students, and what they do is real. It's not like a, hey, blog about these 10 things I tell you to blog about. I'm never going to read your blog. It doesn't really matter. It's like your online journal. Have fun. I'm glad I don't have to do it. She actually makes them do something meaningful. And I think that's a curricular change and a cultural change that we have to really, and so we started with the faculty. And now we're building in a whole part called the Digital Knowledge Center, which is actually going to focus on the students. So we develop faculty, and we're going to build out a part of our group that deals with the students. And we want the students to really come to us. And, you know, frankly, we have one student who's thinking about what would this mean if every returning vet, because her father's in the Marines, had a space where they could frame who they are as a military vet? And it's like, that's the kind of ideas we want our students to have. We live in Fredericksburg. I mean, Quantico is right up the block. That's part of something we could do for our community. And I think something like this, when our students start getting it, and I think they are, I mean, I'm going to be subtle about that, but I think our students really appreciate when they leave that they do have these skills and that they haven't been just throwaway. So I think it balances. Work with the faculty, get them excited, but also understand that the students are the ones who are going to be able to interpret it for us eventually. Because I feel like the work we're doing right now is kind of, it's not very clear, and it won't be clear to us and to, I think, the faculty, but I think it's going to be a lot clearer to the value to a generation of students coming up. And this whole idea of reclaiming their presence online in some space is going to be something that we haven't heard the last of. So does that answer your question at all?
So it's hard to imagine a course better suited for this distributed environment that you created than a course on digital storytelling.
Yeah.
As you broaden this out to more faculty teaching more subjects, coming in with more teaching styles, what are you finding are the pedagogical challenges that you're facing next? What are the things that you're saying, boy, I really wish we knew how to do this better, and this is what we really need to work on to improve this model and make it work for more people?
I think that's right. And, I could get a little bit lost inside DS-106 because, DS-106, I'm still reliving those heydays. Like, remember in spring 2011 when I shaved my head? And everyone's like, shut up. It's 2014. Move on, But I can't. I'm stuck there. But the point you make is a good one is, does DS-106 at its best is just a group of instructional technologists trying to understand and pioneer this for a whole community of faculty. And what we've come up with, and I don't think it's foolproof, but what we've come up with is the idea that if we give them the domain and we give them the options and we still work closely with them, and I think I'll go back to Fern Sebner and even Jeff McClurkin as great examples. They're building out their course as a domain, and they're experimenting with a whole series of tools and applications. And what they're starting to do is they're starting to break their students up into groups that have different projects that they focus on and create. You saw it with the psychological history of women. That's a psychology class that continues to be one of the highest. I mean, we have classes that get 10, 15,000 hits a month. And it continues to be this idea of building a resource beyond the class. And the class getting a kind of a vision of what they're doing is also learning while doing. I know that's a kind of catchphrase, but it comes true. And what we're also trying to do is everything they do that ultimately comes into that class, they do in their own space, but it feeds in. Because then it's potentially an artifact that they take with them when they take that domain with them. Kind of like we saw with the iSchool. Like, these students are doing a lot of great stuff. And what has always deeply hurt me about the LMS, and I think it's also true of a lot of the kind of larger corporate MOOCs, is you'll do your stuff in there, and at the end of the course, it's deleted. Like, what says I don't love you more than I'm going to delete your work, right? It's like, where does the student live in that experience? Right? They're just a number. And that's what we've been throwing around here for the last 2 years, are numbers. And that's why so many venture capitalists' eyes have glazed over, because it's numbers. What about the experience? What are we actually giving our students? Have we ever thought about that? And I'm not sitting here to pretend to speak for the students like I'm some sort of voice for them. I'm not. I'm a 40-year-old instructional technologist who's just trying to make it in this world. And it's hard. At the same time, though, I felt like I came into this field by doing this very thing, by getting into it, by understanding how the web works. And it was transformative. I'm an American literature kind of dropout PhD. What am I doing here talking to you about technology? I mean, someone gave me a domain and a web host and had some belief in me that I could actually start understanding and metaphorizing this space for people to reimagine it for who we are in this age, and it's a privilege to do that. So I don't know what the original question is, but thank you.
All right. Well, thanks very much, Jim.
Thank you, George. I appreciate it.